Hello and welcome everyone to another edition of our podcast for Making Connections, a handbook for effective formal mentoring programs in academia. I am honored to be here today with the three authors of case study number 2 in chapter 17, Mentoring Graduate Underrepresented Minorities in STEM. I am here with Benjamin Flores, who is the Forrest O. and Henrietta Lewis Professor of Electrical Engineering at the University of Texas, El Paso, also known as UTEP. He's the son of a single working mother and the first in his family to pursue and earn a college degree. And as an educator and researcher, he's dedicated to developing socio-academic models that improve the retention and graduation of underrepresented minorities in STEM disciplines. He is here with his colleagues, Milka Montes, who's the associate professor and chair of the chemistry department at the University of Texas Permian Basin, and a former NSF Lewis Stokes Bridge to the doctorate fellow. Dr. Montes prepared for a career in academia, focusing on research, teaching, service, and mentoring excellence, and is currently the campus director at the University of Texas Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation and the co-principal investigator of Includes Aspire Alliance. Jessica Schoenberger Trujillo, who is an associate dean of assessment, accreditation, and strategic planning at the University of Texas at El Paso School of Pharmacy. And she's a trained experimental psychologist who utilizes her skill set to assess student and programmatic outcomes to support evidence-based recommendations. As a single teen parent, she benefited from research mentoring and funded research programs throughout her graduate education. And it's because of this work that was so instrumental in her research and education that Dr. Schoenberger Trujillo's career has focused on serving as an educator, mentor, administrator, and champion for the inclusion of individuals from underrepresented backgrounds in STEM and health disciplines. So hello and welcome.
Hello.
Hello. I can't tell you how thrilling it was for me as I read through your bios, as I read through your case study, the unprecedented commitment you all have made to creating powerful mentoring experiences that support underrepresented students in STEM. I think many of us, both in academia and in the private sector, know that there is a growing need for mentorship, as well as increased diversity in STEM. So it was a pleasure to read your work. And so I want to start by asking you, Ben, can you tell us what was the inspiration for your research and this mentoring program?
Absolutely. And thank you for the invitation. We really appreciate the opportunity to share our thoughts on mentoring of underrepresented minorities at the graduate level. Back in 2007, 2008, I had just started working in the graduate school office of our university, and I came across a series of booklets that have been published by the Council of Graduate Schools. And in those booklets, they talked about a program that they had been working on. They had been collecting data on the time to completion and completion rates of doctoral students. One of the things that struck me was the fact that underrepresented minorities had a much lower graduation rate, and also the time to degree was extended. So I wanted to find out what were the reasons and why this was happening, because I could see that at our own institution that could be a problem, even though we are a Hispanic serving institution and we have been nationally recognized for the work that we've done with undergraduate students. There was still the question about what was happening to our graduate student population. So I felt that it was really important to dig into the reasons why our underrepresented minorities in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or STEM for short, were not earning those degrees. And what I found out was that there was a key element that students attributed to their success, and that was the relationship that they had developed with their faculty mentors that were serving as also as their dissertation advisors. So that relationship from the perspective of the students was crucial. So I thought, well, maybe there's some room here for conducting some research as to how we could develop best practices in this area. There was also an additional piece at the time that I thought it was really important. I was seeing a significant growing number of faculty who were being recognized nationwide by the White House for their efforts in mentoring underrepresented minority students. Most of the work was done for undergraduate students, but there were a few examples of individuals who have dedicated their careers to supporting graduate students. So I felt that combining both of them would be an important step to have a better understanding, tapping into the ideas of why these individuals were being successful.
Thank you for that. And as part of the work that you all did, one of the things I noted in the chapter was that you all expanded or redefined what mentoring meant in a way that truly was about taking into account who your mentee population was. Can you tell me, talk a little bit about that?
Yes, thank you. All right.
Go ahead, Milka.
Okay, so yeah, so basically the way that mentoring is seen in general or in the past is it was just basically professional growth, supporting professional and personal growth in the context of a career and some psychological support, and that's basically what the literature talked about. But based on what Dr. Flores said and what we have been working on, and personally what I have experienced, it's more of a reciprocal relationship. So the way that we define it is as an inclusive mentoring reciprocal relationship in which the mentor engages the mentee or the mentees or proteges from diverse backgrounds, and we make sure that we help them advance their goals to learn from both their professional development, but also discovering their intellectual passion, their personal aptitude. We want to validate their backgrounds and make sure that they take that into consideration as well when they go out in the environment and in the work, in their jobs or whatever their careers may be in the future. So basically, both mentors and mentees or proteges are going to work together and engage both ways. Is bi-directional almost, or both ways where as we help the mentees, we also grow as mentors.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think what was really evident for me was how strongly your own individual experiences really aligned and informed this mentoring program, and expanding the definition of mentoring to validate the backgrounds and accomplishments of mentees and provide that support with cultural awareness and sensitivity is so, to me, it's very poignant, because it is, as you've noted, it is a new way to look at mentoring, or a way to expand our understanding of mentoring. So as folks read through your case study, Milka, what do you want them to take away from this case study?
Well, one of the things that is important is to make sure that we take advantage of the mentoring resources that are provided. And in the case of the mentors, when they're going to develop a program, or if they're basically barely developing a program, is seek out those resources and really pay attention to what applies to them. And don't forget the background of all the possible mentees, because whereas a program may not be very diverse, there's always room for it to develop.
Thank you so much for that. So I know that one of the things your chapter talks about is national funding, and I think folks are going to find that extremely helpful. Jessica, can you share with us some aspects of the program and how they really informed the development of successful mentoring relationships in your case study?
Sure, I'm happy to speak to that. I may also ask both Ben and Milka to join in on that as well. One of the things I think it's important for us to acknowledge is that in that relationship of mentor and mentee, or mentor and protege, there's an assumption that because someone fills that role as being either a STEM researcher or professional, that they must have had training or be ready to take on that role just because they have the expertise in STEM. And I believe that's a faulty assumption. There certainly are supports out there so that that mentor, whether seasoned and having many proteges under them, or someone who's newer to that type of role, there's additional resources and supports that really help grow that relationship and allow for greater success of the protege or the mentee, if we're using that terminology. So thinking about some of these programs, mentor training becomes really essential. And another component, and maybe this speaks more to my area of contribution, we believe in advocating for practices that have been supported by evidence. So ensuring that these programs provide the opportunity to receive feedback from participants, both the mentors and the mentees, so that we can continue to enhance and refine the program offering for that supportive relationship. And continuing to use evidence to make recommendations for the types of activities, resources, or connections, regional connections that may be available. One example I think of this and how we continue to evolve with what programs offer is what we learned during the pandemic. We're very much able to identify things that emerge that are needs of mentees, particularly individuals from underrepresented minority groups, that may not have been paid as closely attention to by mentors until we hit the pandemic, and work-life balance was really brought to the forefront in virtual meetings and whatnot. So as we mentor underrepresented students in STEM, it became obvious if they were managing things at home and taking a larger role and helping them identify how they can pace what they're doing with their research and their training as STEM researchers and professionals, future STEM professionals. So those are some things I think it's really critical that we highlight as being a part of the programmatic offerings that are supportive of these relationships. But Ben and Milka, please join in.
Yes, I will add that one item is absolutely essential, and that is to make sure that we are getting our lessons from the evidence. We need to distill some of that evidence and turn it into something that other people can then relate to and adopt. So I was really pleased when I started hearing the National Academies talk about mentoring as a science, because I think that's what we actually need to do. We need to make sure that if we're going to convince our peers that they should engage in mentoring, that they should also take into consideration the best practices that are the result of the scientific work that we're conducting. So good for the National Academies for recognizing that mentoring is now at the status of a science.
Yeah, thank you for that. I, had shared in another interview that last year for myself at a business event, somebody had said, well, mentoring isn't, it's just something we all know. It's not something people research. And I almost passed out because I thought, no, there's so much research that has happened and that is happening. And to the point that you may have been, is really ensuring that we're fine tuning the idea of mentoring. And Jessica, you made such an important point, because we do tend to take for granted that folks know how to mentor. And there is such a thing as a good mentor, a great mentor, and a mentor who's not so great. And I know evaluation that you talked about was such a key part of your program, but also key to sustainability. So can you all share with us, just in terms of evaluation and the impact and the outcomes of your program, and how all of that's contributed to its sustainability?
Jessica, you want to give it a shot?
Sure, I'm happy to join in on this discussion. Of course, anything that has data, we certainly love to continue tracking over time. We certainly have continued following student outcomes after engagement in these types of programs. One of the things, though, there's more of the formative assessment that we conduct. So getting feedback as individuals are going through these programs, using it to update or refine the offerings, thinking about not just the supports in the laboratory space, but what are some of the other network and social supports that are required in order to really enhance the students' experience and support their long-term development. But there's also the more summative assessments and tracking over time some of the success that we've been able to observe with students graduating and continuing on into either graduate programs or having placement in STEM positions. And I'm happy to pass it over to you, Ben, if you want to talk a little bit more about that, because I know that you've had your hands in a bunch of these types of efforts as well.
Absolutely. I think that being able to gather the evidence, to synthesize our results and to disseminate these results have allowed us to make a case for sustainability at institutions. As we share information, we get more buy-in, and as we get more buy-in, we start building a culture of mentorship. And once the institution is at that point, I think that it has enough momentum to lead a number of other efforts, to be used as a model for other efforts, such as effective teaching, for instance. And I'm reminded of one provost said to me a long time ago, and said the only requirement to teach at a university is to have a PhD. And a PhD is a degree that essentially tells people that you are a very good researcher. It says nothing about teaching. It says nothing about mentoring. All it says is that you can do good research. So, but that's a good starting point, because then you can start teaching and look at it from an academic perspective. It's an academic exercise, and you want to learn to become a better educator. And of course, that also means that you can become a better mentor, because you have the skill set in order to accomplish that. But if you are embedded in a culture where mentoring is sustained, then you can thrive in that environment and truly make a difference when you start working with graduate students. Milka, you want to add something?
I think you covered it all. But if anything, I would add that it's absolutely correct. Being a STEM doctorate, a doctorate in any STEM discipline doesn't mean that we know how to mentor, or doesn't mean that we know how to teach, because we don't take pedagogy courses. And so it's very, very important to have good mentors. And it may be, yes, your thesis mentor, but in my case, I was very lucky because I was part of the Bridge to the Doctorate program. And so within that community, I was able to learn a lot from other professors, other even students, and it was just very good mentoring circumstances that allowed me to come to this other university where I'm working now and take those experiences and reflect that. So it's almost like my students are a mirror of myself when I was a student. And I believe that that's really, really powerful when it comes to mentoring and at a college or a university.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that certainly came through as I was reading, and Ben, you talked about that mentoring culture and that takes time. But and how well linked to that is the research. So I'm trying to put my consultant hat on, that there may be folks in our audience who, whether they're at a higher ed institution or in the private sector, maybe thinking, I just got to get this thing off the ground, right? So how important is it using that evidence-based research and having evaluation to ensuring that you have a sustainable program, but also that it contributes to building in or investing in the time it takes to create a mentoring culture?
And you're absolutely right. It takes a long time to develop a culture at an institution as big as a university or a community college. It's important to recognize that this is not going to happen over time, and that there has to be buy-in both at the upper levels of the administration as well as with the faculty, because you need to have both in order to grow. And I always say that if somebody is curious about best practices, that's a good starting point. Make sure that you look at the literature in your discipline or in your area. Maybe it's a nonprofit, maybe it's a for-profit, maybe it's higher education as a whole. But even in higher education, you have a spectrum of institutions, and all of them have different missions. So it's always good to fine-tune what you're trying to do with your research and mentoring so that you really understand how to make it work better. I don't think that spending time reading, doing research on mentoring is a waste of time. I actually think that it's better to start slow with a good foundation than to just try to hit the ground running and then find out if you have a good assessment team or if you have a good evaluation protocol, to find out that you're not doing the things that you should be doing, or that you're not accomplishing what you expected to accomplish because you didn't take the time to plan.
Yeah, thank you for that. So ultimately, what advice would you give to someone who was starting a formal mentoring program?
I can say my advice is to think about mentoring from a holistic perspective. And also, I think Milka alluded to the fact that it, realize that it's a bilateral relationship. Both sides have something to gain. It's many times we make the mistake thinking that the only one who's benefit from a particular mentorship experience is the protege. But the reality is that we as mentors also grow. So I would say that's absolutely essential.
Yes, and I could add another thing that's really important is to get support. Institutional support is essential for a good mentoring program, especially if you're starting one, because that's going to facilitate all the interactions with the students, with the faculty. And as a mentor, you're trying to help the students or the proteges meet their goals. And there are a lot of departments and components in that area in the university, if it's undergraduate or graduate, that are going to play a role. And so it's good to have good relationships with everyone that is involved. And institutional support and hopefully financial support, it's going to be very important.
I would add one thing as well. We may ignore the things that aren't in our immediate circle. So we assume that what we have to learn from mentoring is just what's right around us. But there's a tremendous amount of work out there in mentoring programs that have demonstrated effectiveness. So there's no need to recreate the wheel. It should be refined and adapted to the context of where it will be used and continue to be monitored. But there's so much out there already. You certainly would want someone who's beginning a program to leverage the existing resources, because people have put a lot of really great work into that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jessica, because there's some wonderful scholarship, including this book, that has such incredible contributions from people across the country and even the globe who are contributing their expertise and experience. And so folks don't need to start from scratch by any means, because there's incredible models, and your case study certainly offers some great models. But as we sort of wrap up our conversation and think about someone who's listening who may be bootstrapping a bit, or maybe has all the resources in the world, from your experience, what is something that is a must-have?
I think I'm being politely pushed to answer that question, which is fine. I think that in order to develop a solid mentorship program, you had to be able to develop trust and understanding on all sides. Those of us who run programs, as well as the individuals who serve as mentors, and those who are there to seek advice. So that trust and that understanding, needs to be developed, needs to be strengthened. And the last thing that you want to do is to breach that trust, because then you're back to ground zero, and that's never a good place. So you should always think about ways to intervene just in time, or to try to even predict. We sometimes talk about intrusive advising. So I like to think also about intrusive mentoring. I stick my head in there in the relationships and saying, "Are you guys doing okay?" Right? That really, makes them realize that somebody else not only has expectations for the maintaining a good relationship, but also that it's in their best interest to do that. That's a must-have for me.
Great. Milka, Jessica, a must-have.
I will add, I think, an assets-based approach, especially when we're engaging in mentorship of individuals from underrepresented minority groups. It's the same side of, I think, that trust that's being developed. It's understanding, leveraging, and supporting the mentee's ability to identify and articulate their assets that they bring. That serves them for a career, for a lifetime. So that's very much a must in my book.
Yeah, those are, you took all my words. Okay, so for me, it's going to have, besides what they already mentioned, accountability. So there has to be accountability on both sides. But of course, on the mentor side, on the, whoever is doing the mentoring, whoever is running or developing the program needs to have some kind of accountability. And like I mentioned, and we mentioned throughout the talk today, there are many levels of mentoring. So what keeps me accountable? Well, my mentors, and I have mentors that are higher up, my previous professors, or there are also students who already graduated, my alumni, and come back and they tell me, hey, you know what, maybe you could have done this better, or this was great and this was good. So that is a very must-have for me.
That's phenomenal. Thank you. What would you think is something that's nice to have?
Well, I think Milka already stated it's always nice to have funding, but sometimes you don't have it, and it's okay not to have it, because that allows you to develop a plan to to seek funding, right? And it doesn't have to be external funding from the National Science Foundation. Sometimes it takes some seed money from the provost office or the dean's office to get a project moving. But in an academic environment, it's always good to have incentives, financial incentives to motivate people. I think that there's a point in life where mentors decide that they want to do things, that they want to become outstanding mentors, because that gives them that in itself as a reward. So they don't worry about the accolades and anything else that's around them, and say, I'm going to do the right thing. And that's, probably ultimately like where you want to be, right? That's a very Zen attitude about it, but it never starts that way. It always starts with a little bit of push, a little bit of support, a little bit of assistance.
For me, I think it's very nice to have collaboration within the institution, but also within the community. You never know when somebody's gonna say you're doing great things and here's a gift. What's your gift fund? For this with this program, I hear a lot about these students going to learn about teaching at the community colleges. What do we do? How do we help? So it's nice to have collaborations within and outside of the institution.
It's nice to have the infrastructure and formal programming already available, which I think connects to the two previous answers here. That may not be the case, but at least starting somewhere in smaller ways, I think that allows for some of the more informal development to lead to the more structured and informal programming. So nice to have, but isn't required to begin.
Excellent. And so, given all your experience, what's something that you can just live without?
I don't think there's anything I would live without when it comes to mentoring. Being a mentee or a protege and being a mentor is really rewarding. So it really doesn't matter. I think all is good for me.
Okay, so I will say that one thing that I really worry about, and I can live without that easily, but I recognize that it's something that we need to work on. It's ineffective mentoring. Mentoring that is done in a vacuum without an understanding of what the goals are. I see the damage that they can do not only to a relationship, but also, it can escalate, and institutions need to worry about mitigating the damages associated with poor mentoring, which is why we always say that institutions should develop a culture and promote that culture as well. And that requires actually that somebody has a pulse on what's happening at every level of a mentoring program, so that we can correct just in time, so that the damage, whatever damage may be happening, is mitigated.
My answer was actually going to be somewhat similar. I think it's this model of learning from bad experiences with mentoring, and that has been an approach in maybe more distant years, and I hope that we can do without that in the future and start learning from these more effective practices and more positive experiences moving forward.
Yeah, thank you all so much for that. In a conversation I was having the other day with Dion Claiborg and her case study, we talked about how even if we have bad mentoring experiences, we can, once we become mentors, duplicate those bad behaviors with the best of intentions, right? And I think, Ben, you really did really nailed it in terms of making it very clear that effective mentoring is so important because ineffective mentoring has such a cascading effect.
Right, right, it does. It not only, again, it's not just something that happens in a dual relationship. It also has implications to a program that is focused on mentoring, and it has implications at the institutional level.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
mitigating the damage, having the safety nets to rescue those who could be potentially harmed by a negative
Yeah.
relationship is important. Yeah, the last thing that we want to do is to replicate something that doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I enjoyed so much about your contribution was the extent to which you talked about safety and creating safety in those relationships for the mentors and mentees, and really the duty of care that you all as practitioners provided in your work, and really reinforce in the frameworks that you've provided for folks. So I want to thank you all so much for your contributions to the book and for our conversation today. I think that as folks read through your case study, they're going to be able to gain so much value, both in practice and really in principle around evidence-based practices, having really clear and a defined understanding of mentoring and making sure our mentors are fully prepared. So thank you all so much for your work in our conversation today.
Our pleasure, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you in our next episode.